Right, beautiful. We are live and ready to rumble. Happy Indie Bookstore Day, and thank you so much for celebrating with us. Today, I am joined by Justin Call, author of the Silent God series. We hosted a wonderful event with him last year for the release of the first book in the series, Master of Sorrows, and we're so excited to have him back both today and on May 18th to talk with us about the second book in the series, Master Artificer. Master Artificer is not out yet, but there is some advanced praise for it already. Let's see. So this one comes from Adam Weller of the Fantasy Book Review, and he says that Master of Sorrows has an eye of the world feel with a Sandersonian magic system, relatively lighter fare on the scale of how modern dark fantasy is measured in recent years. How dark can Book 2 really get? Well, dark, my friends. Really, really dark. If Master of Sorrows lit the match for Annev's path forward, Master Artificer sets the whole forest aflame. And then we have another one from Beth Tabler of Grimdark magazine, who says that Master Artificer has taken the fantasy rulebook, beat it with a bat, and then set it on fire. The tonal shift from the first book to the second is staggering, yet Call makes it work. He drags you along with Annev into the muck and mire, and you want to be there. You want to know what will happen with the characters. And when Call dispenses a tidbit to us readers, we cheer heartily or are appalled to the marrow of our bones. Justin Call is quickly establishing himself to be the new force in the fantasy world and a contemporary to some of our best living fantasy writers. His books will find a home amongst the great fantasy series of our time and be poured over for years to come. It is an exciting thing to see as a reader. A new classic is unfolding before our eyes. Um, and we're lucky enough, Justin will be reading to us a little bit from Master Artificer today. And if you enjoy this reading, please consider supporting Justin by buying or pre-ordering his books. And please consider supporting our bookstore by doing so through us. I will leave links in the YouTube chat box where you can either buy or pre-order the books that he has. And before I turn the time over to him, I just wanted to go over a couple of the other things we're doing for Indie Bookstore Day. If you're around Charlie Square from 2 to 4 today, in the West Plaza, we'll have a variety of authors signing their work. And then at 5 p.m. today, we're going to be rounding off the evening with a grown-up story time and cocktail hour on YouTube. Should be really fun. And without further ado, I will turn the time over to Justin. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here. Virtually, I guess. Yeah, it's good to be celebrating with Weller Bookworks for Indie Bookstore Day. I did have my book launch party there last year, here in the U.S. anyway, and it was great. It was a lot of fun. It was well attended, and it was a fantastic way to celebrate my book coming out. Unfortunately, almost immediately thereafter, COVID attacked and everything shut down, and we weren't able to really do anything in person with anyone. So this was back in February. So it's now been a year, and it looks like we'll be able to do more in-person events in the future, but I'm excited to do these virtual events for now. Yeah, that's some great praise from Adam Weller and Beth Tabler. There's a lot of good stuff already on Goodreads and Amazon. Well, not Amazon yet. Book hasn't come out yet. Comes out May 4th in the UK, and in the US, I believe it's May 18th. And yeah, for those that are unfamiliar with me or what I write or the series, The Silent Gods, I write epic dark fantasy or dark epic fantasy or just plain old epic fantasy. Some people call it grimdark, like Beth Tabler, for example, from Grimdark magazine. Says this is a great example of how grimdark should be told. And I think it's debatable depending on your preferences and taste. I definitely have written the series geared towards sort of a crossbreed, I guess, of young adult and adult. I want to appeal to young adults as well as adults, which means that some of the themes in Master of Sorrows are not as mature as they might be in a regular grimdark book like Joe Abercrombie or Mark Lawrence or any of those other wonderful authors. But the series itself is about a hero who isn't so sure he's going to be a hero or wants to be a hero. It follows a lot of the tropes of the traditional epic fantasy Bildungsroman, where there's a young orphan boy who's raised by a wise old man and finds out he has magic and he's supposed to save the world, etc. And there's a magic school and a lot of other tropes that are fun that I like. But I invert a lot of those tropes. And the series, the 4-book series, the tetralogy, The Silent Gods, is about inverting that trope. And instead of being prophesied to save the world or defeat the great Dark Lord, the hero over the course of the books realizes he is the Dark Lord. And whether you can save the world as the Dark Lord or destroy it, I will leave to future books to say. But Master of Sorrows had a very much feeling like it was a good self-contained story, but also a prologue to a much larger story, and that's true. I have 12 books planned for the entire series, but just the Dark Lord arc is 4 books, and Master Artificer is the second. And now that we have 2 points in the series, you can get the trajectory for where the main character is going with his dramatic arc, with his character development. And as both Adam and Beth said, it's a lot darker. It's a lot more brutal. In book 1, the main character is fighting against impulses and wanting to be the good hero. And some people might complain about that and say it's not dark enough. Well, book 2 is about the next step in that process, where Annev makes the transition between whatever he was before, whether you call him a hero or not, and something that is decidedly less heroic. So I want to do a reading for everybody, and then I guess we'll turn the time back over to Salem. This is from Master Artificer. I've not done any readings yet, aside from the one we did for Weller Bookworks for Master of Sorrows. So depending on how much time we have, I tried to pick a section that wouldn't be too much of a spoiler, but it would still be exciting. This is chapter 27 of Master Artificer, or Master Artificer, depending on your pronunciation. I should say as well, Master Artificer has more points of view than Master of Sorrows and more pages. This particular one is from Annev's perspective. Annev was hazy from the pulsing mist of scarlet. He sheathed his sword and slapped his hand to his neck, the blood running freely through his fingers. I'm bleeding out, fast. Kios, he was going to die out here. No, Annev thought, fumbling for the bottomless bag. The bandage. I could stop this. Using the golden prosthetic, Annev tore the bag free from his tunic, then awkwardly stuffed his massive fingers inside the sack, searching. He pinched a thin shred of fabric between his thumb and forefinger and pulled, carefully extracting the tattered remains of his old shirt of regeneration. Thank the gods. Annev leaned heavily against the shop, feeling distant from his body. His thoughts were clear, but he felt tired, weak. With agonizing slowness, he looped the strips of white cloth around his neck, pulling his other hand away, and tied the makeshift bandages tight around his throat. The effect was instantaneous. Annev felt the flesh beneath, the blood-stoned wrapping begin to knit back together. He felt more alert, more warmth, and the opaque crimson mists began to dissipate, dwindling until they were once again a transparent fog, painting the ash quarter in shifting hues of scarlet and vermilion. Annev counted 10 slow breaths. He was alive. Shaltar had escaped, but Annev was alive. His breathing steadied and his pulse quickened. Titus and Theron, he remembered. They were headed into a slaver trap. In his need to save his own life, he had forgotten about his friends. Annev focused on the magic of the copper ring and sought them out once more, questing to feel where the 2 boys had gone. There. They were a few blocks northwest of him, and Annev began to run in that direction, unsteady at first, but then his boots of swiftness sped him through the streets, like an arrow shot from a bow. As he ran, he noticed that his breathing remained slow and even, as though his stamina were somehow able to match the speed of the boots. It's the shirt, Annev thought, remembering wearing it while fighting the Furog in Chaenbalu. It grants rapid healing and increased stamina. I'd forgotten that. It suddenly seemed unwise to remove the bandage, even if he was healed, so Annev raced on, neither slowing nor tiring. He entered the boneyard within seconds, the stench of death and decay almost overwhelming. The pulses of life that indicated the ash quarter's inhabitants had also diminished, leaving only the faintest traces around the darkest people hidden in the boneyard's shadows. Annev avoided those shadows as he raced toward his friends at the heart of the boneyard. Barely a minute later, Annev reached a massive warehouse covered in dark script and arcane symbols he did not recognize. There was a pile of mismatched bones heaped outside the main entrance to the warehouse, and while most looked old, picked clean by the passage of time or some gruesome scavenger, some were so fresh they had probably been hacked from their previous owners that very night. Annev tried not to dwell on that grisly prospect and focus on what was inside that warehouse. Titus and Theron were there, their hearts thudding in their chests. The pair stood inside a massive ring of something old that stank of death. Annev followed his nose to a draft of air in a small hole punctured through a wall. He peered into the darkened gloom, his vision further aided by the magic of the ring, and quickly saw what his nose had not so easily identified. Bones. Corpses. A massive heap of the dead, piled shoulder high, both those that had perished in the fire decades ago, and those that had been heaped atop them since. As Annev used the magic of the copper ring, though, he caught another familiar scent, one he had expected, yet feared to find. Ilar Kranich and his score of Inishtool slavers. Annev stepped back from the hole and stared through the walls of the warehouse until he spied the dim outline of their living bodies pulsing with heat and blood. But there was something else, too. A scent that was vague but familiar, clean but cold. Annev tried to get a fix on the smell's origin, tried to see the owner's blood pattern, but it was too faint in the mists. Myjun? Was he in there, aiding Ilar and the Inishtoolmen? It was difficult to say with certainty since he was less familiar with the soothsayer's scent, but he suspected he was right. Annev huffed and tried to reach out with his other senses. He couldn't hear anything from inside the massive warehouse. Its occupants were too distant, and while the magic ring enhanced many of his senses, it did not affect that ability. He could taste them, though. The sharp tang of Inishtool spices mixed with the salty sweat of the anxious slavers. Given their proximity to Titus and Theron, Annev had no doubt his friends had been captured, yet the bulk of the slavers seemed anxious. Why? Because they stood in a warehouse stinking with corpses? Or because of something else? Annev steeled himself and pulled the smithing glove back over the hand of Chios, extinguishing its eerie light. Then he drew retribution, mindful not to let the flames ignite until he was ready. On a whim, Annev recalled how he had used the blade and tried to imagine the flames alight, but near invisible, ghostly, sub-red. He cautiously fed that thought into the artifact, and it started to thrum with magic and heat. With the aid of the copper ring, Annev could see the intense flames surrounding the magic sword in the way the red mists swirled about its blade, yet those flames were invisible to his naked eye. Relieved, he unslung Toothbreaker from his back and buckled it to his left hand and forearm. I'm as ready as I can be, Annev thought, feeling small and scared in spite of his magics. Could he free Theron and Titus? Could he attack the slavers without endangering his friends? Annev didn't know. He had no plan at all, but he had an idea about what might happen inside, and as he considered it, the idea developed in his mind. It became a premonition. The Code of Vora ring, Annev thought, relief washing over him. Myjun said it could give me glimpses of the future. He leaned into his hopes to save his friends, letting that inform the ring, and opened his mind to what he might encounter inside the warehouse. Guards patrolling the perimeter of the room, their torches lit in anticipation of someone's arrival. Ilar standing in the center of the room, his soldiers grouped around him as he questioned Titus and Theron regarding the whereabouts and intentions of Annev, Srayon, and the rest of their company. Annev had glimpsed that inside. The boys would have few answers, he knew, so Ilar would try torture. First pain and humiliation, then disfigurement, and finally death. But Annev would stop it. He would carve a new entrance into the wall at the opposite side of the warehouse and stalk inside like a thief, invisible in the darkness. The dead were heaped in every corner. Annev would bypass them, racing for the circle of the dead at the center of the large room, with the living congregated inside. Annev would leap into the group of soldiers and unleash his fury on the slavers, a living whirlwind of death. And Ilar would behead his friends. Annev tried again, this time leaping straight for Ilar. He would decapitate the slave master in one stroke and then turn to free his friends, and the Inishtool slavers would cut him to pieces. Annev imagined using stealth to free his friends. He would stalk the perimeter of the room, creating distractions, draw out each of the torch-bearing soldiers and killing them each in turn. Well, you can see where this is going. We'll stop there. Annev is trying to find a way to save his friends using the power of the magic artifacts that he's acquired over the course of Master Sorrows and Master Artificer. And even though they're powerful artifacts, they don't necessarily guarantee that he can have success in saving his friends or himself.
Thank you so much, Justin. Very dark stuff indeed, but we like that here. My first question for you is, what is it about fantasy and grimdark fantasy in particular that appeals to you as a storytelling vehicle?
You know, I love fantasy because, well, I've been reading it since forever. But um, the sense of wonder that you get from reading fantasy, imagining things that are impossible, but I love the puzzle of epic fantasy when you get a piece of a magic system and you don't know how the magic works because you've never seen real magic, but now you want to know more and you're learning this new thing, and it's exciting and it's fun and it's new and it feels real because the world feels real. But it's not just with magic, it happens with the characters, with the setting, with the world, with the history. You're piecing together, oh, these people dislike these people, and this is racist, but this is okay. And just like piecing together these cultures and stories and all of these elements is, I love that opportunity to build the story along with the author as you go, kind of fill in the blanks, and you become part of the story and you imagine all of it. It's very exciting. Grimdark in particular, um, I never really knew if I was a Grimdark person, and I still don't. I still consider myself more of a dark epic fantasy author, because I see hope in what I write, and Grimdark can have hope. Although many of it is more nihilistic or is more, um, just really bleak. And I would say my books are maybe similarly bleak, but I feel like the hope is still there. Maybe I'm wrong. The way I see my stories, um, I feel like the characters are trying to do the best with what they know and have, and that's true of Grimdark. But in a traditional epic fantasy story, you will often have things that almost feel too good to be realistic. A character is too noble, or too dumb, or too smart. Just things are too convenient. And I feel like with Grimdark, or its varying shades, Grimheart or dark fantasy or whatever else, um, you have, not always, but you have the really good authors try to present a reality that is more like the one we know. And for some people, they don't want that. They want something that's epic and noble and grand, and I like that too. I love Sanderson and David Eddings, and these are the people who inspired me and continue to inspire me. But also, I want to write those stories with a little bit more truth to them, a little bit more honesty in the writing. I don't want it to be too easy. And having a character who's supposed to be the Dark Lord is a great vehicle for that, because it forces us to confront this idea that maybe the Dark Lord isn't as bad as we thought, or maybe he is, but we can empathize with him. And that's a perspective we don't often take in fantasy, traditional fantasy.
Yeah, thank you. I love how your series kind of turns that on its head. It's really interesting and engaging in that way. I was poking around on your website a little bit earlier today, and I saw that you're also working on a board game right now.
Yes and no. I need to update the website. If you look on the website, it looks like I'm still writing Master Artificer, which is coming out in a week or two. But yeah, I do own a board game company. I develop board games. Me and two of my partners, and we have released one game, Imperial Harvest, and we developed another game called Royal Strawberries, um, which is fun and it has its own history and rules, which I think you can kind of see a lot of. Uh, if you, I mean, just in what I read today, some people have compared what I write to uh, RPG lit, I think is what it's called, or game lit. But because there's an element of, like, you're reading a book of Dungeons and Dragons or playing a video game and somebody's leveling up, and it's never quite as obvious as that. But I do play with those tropes on purpose. I try to present those things because those are the things that resonate with me that I love, and board games as well. I love rules and magic, and that's very obvious in my books. If you look at the end of Master Artificer, there's a big piece of paper that explains how the magic system works. So And in fact, Royal Strawberries and Imperial Harvest, there is a version of that game in Master Artificer, if you pay attention and look. It's not called either of those things, but it does have the same rules, and it's a real game. So yeah, so I do bring that into. I try to blend the two worlds that I enjoy living in.
Awesome. I love that little Easter eggs. It's really fun. In the last few minutes that we have, I just wanted to ask if you have any closing thoughts or remarks that you wanted to leave our audience with today.
Well, that's so open-ended. You're gonna give me anxiety trying to figure out how to answer that one. What do I want to tell people? For those that are listening, thank you for coming. I appreciate you supporting me and Weller Bookworks and Indie Bookstore Day, number one. Specifically about Master Artificer, if you've read Master of Sorrows and you thought, it's not dark enough, this isn't the Dark Lord that I want, then you probably got bored in the first half of the book when I was laying out the foundation for how I write my books and stories. And I'll freely admit, I like the long form. I like books like Patrick Rothfuss, where they take their time telling the story and you get to know the characters. Because if you're going to tell an origin story, you really only get one origin. You only get one chance. And I don't want to leave anything out. And maybe that's selfish. But people loved pretty much universally the second half of Master of Sorrows, very climactic. And we continue with that in Master Artificer, and it's a lot bigger. It's 1,000 pages instead of 600, and you get 3 or 4 or 5 more points of view. And I will say, I try to emulate the people that I love, like Brandon Sanderson and Patrick Rothfuss and David Eddings and even Mark Lawrence and Joe Abercrombie to a certain extent. I try to bring those things in, and I think about Mistborn, which is my favorite trilogy of fantasy, and that's a great example of Brandon Sanderson having a great magic system. Everybody would accept that, I think. If you like hard magic, if you like soft magic, maybe not. But the characters level up like a video game. All of the characters, even the minor characters, the tertiary characters nobody cares about, like Spook in book 1. By book 3, he is this epic, amazing, heroic character. And the characters who are heroic in book 1 have become godlike. And that's kind of exciting. I like seeing stuff like that. And I hope the Silent Gods is an opportunity for you to see my characters level up in a similar way. Characters who were less interesting or were interesting but not three-dimensional enough in Master of Sorrows, that's part of the plan. You have to start somewhere. And then even some of the villains who are two-dimensional or some of the antagonists have become much enhanced. They've leveled up considerably in this book. So there's a lot of opportunities there for people that were anticipating or looking forward to that in Master of Sorrows. It's delivered in Master Artificer, and it'll continue as we progress with the rest of the series.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. This has been Justin Call. The books are Master of Sorrows, which you can get any old time, and Master Artificer, which gets released on May 18th. We are doing another event with Justin Call on May 18th, so be sure to check it out. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you. You as well, Sam.